The Bunzerelly Show has been nominated for Orlando Weekly's 2018's Best Local Podcast. Go to Bunzerelly.com for more information and a direct link to vote.
This is the Bunzerelly Show.
So, I've already gone through the original trilogy, and this time we're going to take a look at the prequel trilogy. So we're going to kick it off with 1999's The Phantom Menace. Joining me once again, I want to welcome Khiim to the show. Now, Khiim, you and me kind of have like a generational gap, which is very interesting for the sake of the show, because I, of course, grew up with the original trilogy, and you grew up with the prequels. So I really want to get your perspective on how the prequels impacted you growing up.
Well, first, I want to thank you for having me on the show again. But, yeah, there's definitely that generational gap, and you can see that reflect in the Star Wars community.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like you said, yourself being from the original trilogy and myself being from the prequel that followed.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, to me, the Phantom Menace, it really it sparked off something new.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I'm not sure if it was something that was meant for my generation, and maybe that's why the older generation didn't like it. I know there's a lot of nitpicking between the lines and everything, but just initially just revisiting this now as an adult at this time, because at the time I was 6 or 7 years old when it came out.
Mm-hmm.
The first question I just asked myself is it really that bad, you know?
Well, I think to kind of understand from my generation standpoint, and first of all, when this movie came out, it was a 16-year gap between Return of the Jedi. So the actual momentum going in was insane. It was probably more insane than it was for The Force Awakens, even though it was kind of close to the same gap. But the thing was we never thought we'd see another Star Wars. We thought it was done. And I guess the best way to explain it, because you and me did the Solo show together, and it's really a more softer version of it, because Solo kind of kept it between the lines and kept it safe, but we're like looking for like things to say afterwards. People looked at it and picked it apart, but the initial feeling, the initial going into that theater, like I remember coming home to my brother and saying, hey, there's a new Star Wars movie. I came home from work, I grabbed them off the couch, and I'm like, we're hitting the theater now. We're going, opening day, front row center, and the energy from that, because that crawl's always been the same in all the episodics. Long time ago, Galaxy Far Away, the crawl starts, and there's that energy, and you're like, I can't believe I'm watching this. So that's what it meant to us. And, of course, we're going back from the history. But it's curious to see from your standpoint, because you not having the baggage. See, the lucky thing is you didn't have the baggage we had. You just went in like, here's Star Wars. So you had nothing to compare it to. Do you know what I'm saying? So your initial thoughts, like, I mean, did you think it was, you enjoyed it, I'm assuming, because you started with that, and you're obviously a Star Wars fan.
Yes, I can remember the same feeling as being a kid. Like, I came out of that theater, and, you know, I wanted a lightsaber, and me and my friends were running around the neighborhood, swinging them around, you know, pretending to be our favorite Star Wars characters. It definitely was something that, like, immediately took an impact on my life, you know?
I think you actually had a better advantage than me, because, like, I was born in 78, and the movie had come out in 77, and you had told me off the mic that you were 6. Like, I had probably seen the movies in passing even younger, and the original trilogy, and kind of understood them more as I got older. You know what I'm saying? Like, it meant more to me as I saw them more and understood them more, whereas you got to, like, I think you were at the perfect age to enjoy it to its maximum.
Yeah, I agree, because just watching it over and over throughout the years, each time I watch it, as I've grown mentally, you know, it means something more. It reveals another layer to the story that's going on just as I age, you know?
And the funny thing about that is when I because we had planned to talk about this, and I thought about it more and more, and it's like, you know, whatever people, and we're going to really dive into the Phantom Menace, but this is all part of the conversation, and it's important, and we're going to kick it off. You know, this is the first kicking of the new trilogy, but even with, like, the things going on with Star Wars now, this has been purchased by Disney. Everything's been very polarizing with The Last Jedi and Solo and everything, but it's funny, it's because we're not really going to understand the impact of this until years from now. because these Force Awakens movies, we're not going to know what they mean until it's the next generation because it really is their movie. So it's very curious to see how this is going to play out later. So as much as like people like to hate on the prequels, the old schoolers, a lot of good came in there, and it's George Lucas, and it was baby, and he had a vision. So I want to delve into, because I'm watching it again, and it really is. He had a vision, and he wrapped it up in a trilogy. So I appreciate and enjoy it, but I want to pick it apart. I want to pick apart the good and the bad. You know what I mean? I just don't want to just go at it like hating it. I really just want to pick it apart. So what were the first things that caught your mind, like when you kind of like looked at it again?
When I was going through it this time, I was just basically, just analyzing everything from the acting, from the camera perspective, everything, and I was just thinking about, because, you're introduced immediately to Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan. So I just wondered, what do you think of their overall relationship throughout the movie?
I like their dynamic, and they didn't get too deep with their relationship because it wasn't, I don't want to say it was, they didn't do it enough. It was just enough. He's the master. He's the apprentice. That relationship is there. It wasn't as deep as a friendship as Anakin and Obi-Wan, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything, and it doesn't mean a problem with it. It really just means that Qui-Gon was a very disciplined teacher, and Obi-Wan was a disciplined apprentice. But to my generation, whereas, I came in seeing Alec Guinness's Obi-Wan, and the first things when those trailers were coming out that got everybody hyped was Ewan McGregor's portrayal of Obi-Wan, because now he's following Alec Guinness, and the first line, I remember it specifically because I remember that energy. You know how there's certain moments in trailers that you just are just glued in your head. And it was that line where he goes, once the droids take over the planet, they'll soon take over you. And it just, the cadence and the delivery was consistent with Alec Guinness's Obi-Wan. And that just sold, we were sold on Obi-Wan before the movie even came out. That was like the first leap, the first like hurdle, and it was like a win. Like, whatever anybody says about these prequels or the later movies, like, we have accepted Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I would definitely say he's taken on the character much like how Hugh Jackman has taken on Wolverine, Yeah. Like, when you think of Obi-Wan Kenobi, you think of Ian McGregor.
Yeah, I mean, I just look at him. I could buy him and Alec Guinness. Maybe down the road I'll think the same of Harrison Ford and Alden Ehrenreich. But, I mean, like, that's one of those things that time will tell. But, of course, Ewan McGregor has the advantage of those three trilogies to a point where, we've decided, like, if we go forward with an Obi-Wan trilogy, like, I think the whole fans will go nuts if we don't have Ewan McGregor. Because as far as I'm concerned, he's Obi-Wan right now.
Yeah, I agree, especially if they didn't have some way to kill off or, like, end that version of Obi-Wan, like they like to do in movies. If they just left it as an open end like that, I agree people would definitely be irate.
Now, I think some of the things, when you look back at the flaws, and I'm going to give Jar Jar a minute or two because I really want to dissect Jar Jar, and I want to get really intricate. But if I had to put it on, if I had to take a couple steps back and look at where some of the flaws were, and I'm saying, like, what made it, I don't want to hate on it. I'm just saying if I'm looking at the flaws of it, it's like, George Lucas had a vision. So he wrote New Hope by himself. And then when he did Empire, he had Lawrence Kasdan helping him write, the guy that wrote Solo, and he wrote Jedi, and even Force Awakens. But he had his vision. And sometimes you have a vision and you need a little bit of help to get to the next level. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when he did his trilogy, he went at it by himself for all three movies. And I think the real problem was, there's two things. I'm not saying the real problem, but there was two things. He didn't have anybody to consult with. He didn't have anybody to bounce things off of. Because no matter how good you are, it's nice to, like, talk to somebody, be like, hey, what do you think if I do this? There was nobody shaking their head no at him. And I think the other problem was the CGI. And now CGI is still here and it's still everywhere. But the way it was groundbreaking at its time, the original trilogy, because of all the puppetry and everything else. But George Lucas had a vision. And now that, George Lucas, it was Lucasfilm that did Jurassic Park and everything. So, they achieved like breakthroughs in this technology. It was awesome. It made it so you could do anything. But I think the problem was because he decided, like, look, whatever I imagine I can make happen, he lost sight of like the value of real sets. And they wouldn't find that out later until like The Force Awakens, where they realized you had to have a balance. But I don't think it was just a mistake. You know what I'm saying? You're not going to know these things till after the fact. So I don't fault him for that.
Well, I agree. That was actually one of the first things that I thought about, because I know one of the main complaints is the switch over from practical prop sets to the CGI. Mm-hmm. And I just thought about it as, like, honestly, you have to think about it this way. It's the coming of age. Like, at that time period, that's what was going on in the movie era. CGI was starting to make through, Mm-hmm. And honestly, I think it's just a question of, like, coming up to, did the CGI hold up? And I feel like in that era, it doesn't necessarily, because of how technology evolves. Like, we go through technology and it updates so quickly that the CGI that came out back then, it looked good to us at the time, but it just doesn't hold up today. And I feel like that's some reason why it gets so many punches that it does.
I didn't even notice it until I watched it today. I was like, wow, like I could actually see it. And I never saw it. When I first saw it, I didn't think nothing of it. I knew there was a lot of CGI. And I knew from the behind the scenes they show like the actors like mainly in front of green screens. And I'm not faulting anybody. He just thought it was the best thing to do. He didn't, it was just a lesson learned. But it is. The problem is even any degree of CGI. I mean, if you watch the first Toy Story and if you watch the third Toy Story, it is leaps different. Leaps.
It is.
The first Toy Story looks like a college commercial. Like, that commercial is like, hey, come learn computer animation over here. That's how the first Toy Story looks. And the third one is like a beautiful like masterpiece. And who knows, that might become dated in a few years. But yeah, that was, and they learned that now with the new movies is like, you have to have sets. You know what I'm saying? You could throw CGI in there and you could use it, but you have to have a set, I believe, unless the whole, this is Avatar where like every minute is CGI.
I will say this, though. Even though they did a lot more CGI in this, I found this movie compared to the previous trilogy to be more eye-captivating. They used a lot more colors. I feel like the first trilogy was a lot more monotone. You had just a lot of black, white, gray, brown. You would have your green planets and stuff. But this trilogy coming in, it really just they started using like a lot of more colors even in the sets, even though they were CGI. It was a much more eye-captivating movie to watch.
Well, what it was George Lucas was able to use his imagination. So it was beautiful because when you look at Naboo, it's like, wow, this is cool. And he shows you other worlds, and he made it like, look, whatever you could imagine, you could do. And and I think that's where kind of Disney lost its track of like that happy medium, because Disney, I think when Disney first jumped in with The Force Awakens, they were like, okay, let's stay away from the prequels or the mistakes of the prequels. But then they just give us a desert planet again and an ice planet again, because everybody thinks they know what you want, what the fans want, and they keep stumbling and making mistakes. And I'll tread to this later, but the importance of the prequels in general and the trilogy was the actual arc and what they brought us. And what they brought us was an expansion of what Jedi life was before the Empire and what the Republic was before the Empire. It put all the pieces together and explained it. And another big part of it was Palpatine's rise to power. And I watched it and I was waiting for it. And this was, everything with Palpatine and this movie and the prequels, in The Phantom Menace, was done so subtly that, like, I went in knowing he was going to be the Emperor. I don't know if you did. Maybe not, because I was such a nerd. I was researching the actor and found out, you know, it's the same actor from Return of the Jedi that played the Emperor. But just, there was no... Okay, so there was a part where he goes, you can't go back to Naboo. I'm afraid they're going to, you know, force you to sign a treaty again. And she's like, I must go. And then it just stops at his face, and I'm waiting for him to smile. And it just cuts out. He doesn't smile. And I'm like, you know what? They handled this guy good.
They did.
Like, you wouldn't know he was the Emperor if you didn't know that, you know, perfect that information.
And see, me coming up as a kid going through these trilogies, I did not know that was Darth Sidious until the end. Yes. Because I did not know Darth Sidious prior to that, you know? So, like, it definitely did convince me. Like, you know, by the time by the time Revenge of the Sith came out, I was a little bit older, so I understood the Star Wars lore a little bit more. Mm-hmm. But at that point, I still did not make that connection. You know, they hit that very well.
Which is cool because, like I said, if you're hitting it from the first time, if that's where you're starting, and you were, you know, or you could have been surprised if you didn't research it so much, but that's an achievement of the movie.
We'll be right back.
Are you looking to make some extra money? Have you considered driving for Uber? Well, right now, the Bunzerelly Show has teamed up with Uber to bring you this special offer. If you use our link to sign up as a driver, Uber will guarantee $200 on your first 30 trips, or they'll pay the difference. Terms and conditions may apply. Go to uber.bunzerelly.com for more information, or look for the link on this episode description.
You know, individually, it could be picked apart, you know, the movies themselves. But like you said, overall, there was a great arc story that was told. You know, yes. You got to literally see this character, Darth Vader, who was literally a tyrant of space, start off as pure, innocent child. Yeah. You know, and you get to see him grow up. And, you know, it's great. And I feel like a lot of the things that fell short in the movie Han Solo were achieved in this movie. So I'm not completely sure why, like, the Star Wars community gives it so many punches, you know?
I think they give it less these days. And I'll really give a lot of it to Dave Filoni, because he launched a cartoon, The Clone Wars, and all of a sudden, like, older generations are watching it with their kids, and you're, like, crossing generations. And it kind of... Dave Filoni kind of mastered Star Wars. I'm not going to attribute it all to him, but it was like an example of it. It's like all these ideas were good ideas. Even if they were executed, there were some stumbles. And I do want to delve into that a little bit, but it was like, they are cool things here. The Republic thing is cool. The Jedi thing is cool. Okay, so like you can say, like, one of the complaints was, you know, Jake Lloyd's acting and stuff as Anakin, but he's a kid. You know what I mean? Like, what do you expect him to do? If you're going to blame anybody, blame, like, some casting on that or something. But, you know, we accept kid actors. Kid actors are kid actors. They're kids. I'm just saying why it maybe had some backlash. So, I mean, even Mark Hamill stood up to his defense and said, listen, I know about clunky dialogue. He goes, but to watch the world just attack this kid was ridiculous, which is true. Yeah. And I really wanted to objectively look at this Jar Jar thing. Because it's very easy to say he's the worst thing that happened in Star Wars or whatever, and I don't believe that. I think he was a sneeze away from being an awesome character, and maybe history will remember it differently. But the idea was George Lucas had kids, and he wanted to make something to appeal to kids and make it family, the same way the old ones did. But you know, when in the original trilogy, the comic relief was the droids. It was 3PO. Who just kind of had like a neurotic personality, and R2, who had like his little kind of sass going on. But the Jar Jar stuff, it was like the accent, the cadence, the way he walked, all of that I could forgive and say, it's his native tribe because he wasn't far enough. But the other Gungans weren't as bad as Jar Jar. But it's like when he's walking through Tatooine, and he just like, sticks his tongue out to grab a frog from a shop. Like, really, bro?
Like you said, it really reflects that George Lucas made that character for kids, because that's exactly what I thought. When I grew up with this movie, I loved Jar Jar Binks, and then when I got older, I was like, this character is kind of annoying.
Yeah.
But watching this movie prior to this, I look at it and I just understand, like, all of those mannerisms are mannerisms of a child, you know? Like, that character is made for a child to be able to relate to.
But he could have found a happy medium, because, like, when I was growing up and watched 3PO and R2, I thought they were funny and cute. But 3PO and R2 aren't too silly. Do you know what I'm saying?
I just see it as, like, it was a new way to attract more people into the Star Wars fandom, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can't really hold any, like, ill manner towards them. I may not agree with the character completely, but I can see from a director's perspective and the objective of bringing people into this franchise, because they're essentially rebooting the Star Wars universe.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not only trying to get the old people who are seeing it, who remember what Star Wars is, they're trying to get a new generation to, fall in love with this universe as well, And I think that people have to try and remember that. They have to, Jar Jar Binks just kind of reflects that time period,
But the shame of it, the real shame of it is I truly believe he was like a tweak or a sneeze away from being a cool character, because he had his moments. Like when
I agree with you.
When he's in the dark room with Queen Amidala, and he's like, "We're brave warriors," he's like just being serious. The accent and the talk and the cadence is fine. It's just like, I don't want to see him slipping on banana peels. You know what I'm saying? But he's like, we're ready to do battle. Like, I believed him as a warrior. If they just a couple tweaks, and he could have had a bigger part in the whole prequel. And George Lucas realized the backlash pretty early on, because Jar Jar definitely took a back seat in the next two movies because of that. But, like Dave Filoni even pulled him out a couple times and did some stuff in the Clone Wars. And I was like, certain times Jar Jar could be good if you have him balanced.
Yeah, I feel like that potential was there. There was one specific scene that I remember seeing where I don't know if it was just editing on the film or not. Like, maybe that scene was filmed later and they maybe have placed it before. The revealing of when they had Natalie Portman reveal herself to be the real Queen Amidala.
Mm-hmm.
But it was prior to that. He says to young Anakin, he tells him the Queen is hot and she's really friendly, or something along those lines. And up until that point, it had only been the servant Padme who had been interacting with Anakin. So I'm not sure if that was him picking up on the fact that she was the real queen, or if they, they kind of just like edited it weird. But when I saw that, I thought that was kind of strange. I was like, wait, does he know that servant Padme is the real queen, or, did they edit it wrong?
I remember seeing that scene. I couldn't remember. So the queen didn't say anything before that scene. It was just. She
did, but there was nothing of her being extra friendly. The queen is always that, like, she doesn't smile. Even when somebody says a joke to her, she's like stone faced. So, like, there was nothing to lead me to think that he was talking about the actual queen. Up until that point, it had been Anakin and servant Padme who were getting close and, joking with each other and everything. And Jar Jar was there to witness that as well. So I'm not sure. There could have been some more depth to the character and they cut it for whatever reason. But I caught that.
When you watch it the first time, and I understand you were young, but were you surprised by the reveal that Padme was Amidala? Because I thought they did a pretty good job about it. But I don't remember if I was initially surprised by it.
To be honest, I don't think I was, because I can't remember any like major impact from the character Amidala. Natalie Portman, she's an attractive woman, but I will say that overall, like, her character, I don't know, it was just kind of too damsel,
She was very prominent in the movie for her not to be the queen. He's like, why are we focused on this? Like, she's in this movie a lot for not being the queen, So yeah. I feel like I feel like maybe surprised, but not too surprised. I can't remember because it was a long time for me when I first saw it. I think there was a scene where when they're in Naboo, the part that might have finalized it was when they're in Naboo, so the queen's wearing a little less decoration than she normally does, and then you could actually see the differences in the facial structure and stuff. I'm like, wait a minute, that's definitely not the queen. And maybe that's when I pick, or maybe when Anakin went to say goodbye to her, which is fine. Because I still believe the decoy part, at least she's fooling the galaxy, even if she's not fooling the audience.
Well, I did question it this time around. Like, how did these two Jedi not know, or like sense that at all? But
yeah, that's true.
They played it off very well as far as convincing everyone else. There was a moment where I wondered if I'm not sure, he might have been her captain or lieutenant, but the one guard that was always there, scene where he basically, Padme is like, she wants to go into Tatooine with Qui-Gon and who was it? Who else went in with him?
Qui-Gon, Jar Jar.
Qui-Gon it was just Qui-Gon and Jar Jar, right? Because Obi-Wan stayed behind.
Yes, Obi-Wan stayed behind in the ship, so it was Qui-Gon, Jar Jar, and that was it.
Yeah, okay. Maybe R2-D2, I believe he went too?
Yep, he went.
Okay, so initially when Qui-Gon, Jar Jar, and R2-D2 went into Tatooine, and Captain Panaka, when he initially stops them and says, wait a minute, the Queen is ordered for, her handmaiden to go with, he kind of had this look on his face like he knew that she was the Queen, so I think he was in on it as well. Like maybe it might have been within her inner circle. But as far as them confusing and fooling everybody else, it played off well. It did.
Yeah, I think he knew because I think in Attack of the Clones, he's kind of nearby when one of her decoys got killed. I haven't seen that scene in a long time, but I believe, I wouldn't be surprised if he's in on it. One of the complaints from the older Star Wars fans that look back at it, and it wasn't too big of a complaint, but it was like a continuity issue about kind of like the coincidences of Anakin building C-3PO. And, because it was after the fact. And it doesn't bother me so much. And when I watch it, it's like, I can actually accept from the scope of the Force and all these coincidences, especially because, the droids ended back up in the hands of, Leia's caretakers, Padme's droids. It all adds up to me. So I could buy into all of that. My only slight problem with that was the fact that Anakin built his mother a protocol droid. So I don't know what C-3PO was supposed to do for Anakin's mom. But it doesn't really, that's a slight detail. But the fact that he built 3PO, I kind of live with that. And it's kind of like, it's kind of neat seeing those droids kind of coast through the whole series because it means more later in A New Hope how you realize how they got on that ship. Because the Revenge of the Sith, the jump forward, is they end up on the exact same ship that they're on in the beginning of A New Hope, which is that Alderaan ship of Bail Organa's with Princess Leia. So that I all buy. That little details like that, that's all nitpicking and stuff. But
yeah, I agree. I think it's nitpicking as well because me personally, I love seeing the fact that Anakin had built C-3PO. I heard the same complaint that, people were upset that maybe they put too much of these heritage characters within the Phantom Menace itself. But I don't know. I think it was evenly balanced, and it definitely it gave more depth to the story. I think that's what the Phantom Menace, as well as these prequels, that's what they did. They gave depth to what is already pre-established.
Yeah, and it also connects you. It connects you to the same world. Now, of course, R2's scene was awesome. Like R2's debut at the time, because for your generation, you saw R2 for the first time. For us, it's like we're realizing it's R2 right like when he turns his head. Because we're like, is that R2? And then the droids start getting blown off the ship, and then you realize it is R2. And they're like, this little droid does it. And he turned his head, and the theater erupted in applause. It was just nuts. But even 3PO, like Tony Daniels, the same guy has been playing 3PO forever. Since 1977, it's been Tony Daniels has been C-3PO. And he's been him in the cartoons. He's been him in every movie. Except Solo, which they wanted to fit in that. But Rogue One, everything. Anthony Daniels has been C-3PO. And even in The Phantom Menace, because of the way that C-3PO skeleton was it was like a kind of like a puppet. And there was a guy behind him in green screen with these sticks that went to the puppet. And they wanted Tony Daniels to just voice him. And he goes, no, you put me in the green screen because I know how to move like 3PO. He's like, they're not going to do it right. Which shows like his passion for the character. And it kind of gives me a good respect for him because, some people get a little bitter when they're typecast as something or if they do nothing else. It's like, no, he's embraced himself being C-3PO, and I really appreciate that. And plus, it makes it Star Wars with C-3PO in it. Because how else are you going to throw him in there? Unless you made him... Maybe the only other judgment call they could have made later was just make him one of Padme's droids. But it was good. Yeah. I was glad he was in there. Like I'm saying, the little complaints are maybe some judgment calls, but that's because Lucas went by himself,
I don't know. I think it fits in, especially since we have the advantage now in this time to see all of the Star Wars content together, including the Clone Wars animated series, including Rebels, and they've done a really good job of like patching the so-called holes that were in the Phantom Menace to make, or the Phantom Menace and the trilogy is a part of, but they've done a really good job of patching the holes and just making this really good, complete, flowing story.
Yes, I agree. I actually had a thought, and it went away because, like, well, maybe they should have kept Dooku around longer. Not Dooku, I'm sorry. Darth Maul. Anakin would have fought Darth Maul at the end. Anakin would have done this and this and that. But then I think of what the things that happened in the second movie, and they wouldn't have worked with Darth Maul. Like, Darth Maul, as much as he was a warrior, I couldn't picture him doing some of the things Dooku did. Or they'd have to go head-to-head with Yoda and different things like that. So everything worked out the way it did for a reason. And meanwhile, Darth Maul, was such a beautiful, awesome character that they brought him back in cartoons, and recently in they decided, like, you know what? They brought him back so believable and so well. Yeah. And a lot of that you got to attribute to Sam Witwer's performance of him in the cartoon, that all fandom got together and said, you know what? We're all down with this Darth Maul thing. Like, nobody questions it. Everybody just is down with the Maul thing. It's very funny.
That's just a character that, we fortunately got, and everyone does love that character. And I'm definitely hoping that we can get more, and that Disney can recognize that that's what the fans want. We want more Maul,
And a thing about Ray Park, too, was even after Maul died, Ray Park, I believe, and I'll look it up to make sure, but Ray Park, like, choreographed that whole prequel trilogy. He trained Ewan McGregor and Liam Neeson in that fight scene. They choreographed it together, kind of brought everything to the next level. And that was something cool to see. Before these movies, the lightsaber fights are very kind of slow and this and that, and it actually kind of shows you, like, the gracefulness of it back in that time. And
exactly.
And the Jedi. And it was really cool.
That was something that I was definitely taking note of, because I even know when we did the Solo review, I mentioned that the fact that we keep getting, nowadays we're not getting, with the Solo review, I remember that I mentioned that nowadays we're not getting these skilled Jedi, we keep getting Padawan after Padawan, and it was just great to see through this trilogy, you get to see these skilled, like, Force users, I remember in one of the first opening scenes when they get onto the Federation's blockade ship, and they initially go in there and then they try and gas them out, and they come out and fight the droids or whatever, that they use Force Run. And I can't think of any time in any of the other trilogy series where I've seen the Jedi use Force Run.
No, that was a first.
I didn't even remember that as a child, but they literally, you hear the sound barrier break, and they speed off running.
Yeah.
And I thought that was crazy to see, I want to see more of that. I feel like nowadays the closest thing that we have to compare, which I thought was cool, was Luke doing his Force apparition.
Yeah.
But I want to see what more is capable with the Force as far as on screen. I know comic books and animation series, we're getting a lot more, but on screen, they're falling short as far as portraying what the Force is actually capable of.
And I think a lot of that, I think the way they need to move, maybe that's not, and we've talked about this before, like where else could you go? What else to touch upon? If you go to those ancient times when like either they're discovering the Force or learning how to use the Force or just seeing different things in that time period, you know, when things were, because right now you're in this time of the galaxy when it's a little advanced. So to see a little more, but a little more less tech advanced space society. Of course, they still have to have that space travel. So I guess it couldn't be that far back, but maybe a little less Republic, maybe. But just kind of see that the Jedi in their prime. Because you remember, like later, Palpatine says, "Once more, the Sith will rule the galaxy." So what about? Well, what did they do? When did the Sith rule the galaxy? Things like that would be neat to see.
And I also think that maybe the problem could be that since they're now continuing around where technically the end of the Star Wars story is, which is the first trilogy, there's not much more that they can go past. The only way they can expand more now is going backwards, like you said.
That's what I think.
This new trilogy is too close to the first trilogy, and maybe that's why we're stuck within this kind of, this kind of era.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'd like to show me something I have no clue about. Just,
exactly.
Blow my mind. You know what I'm saying? And then when you get away from these heritage characters, that's when you have no strings attached, and you could really take the risk and the leaps and stuff without, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. What are you going to ruin? If you're like 200 years before the Republic, who's going to say something? And then all you got to do is tell a good story. That's it.
Exactly.
You just have to just show something awesome. Show something that you don't even know where it's going to end because it's so far back. So the potential is cool.
Yeah, and I feel like honestly, this time period that they chose, with beginning with the Phantom Menace, ending with Revenge of the Sith, that was George Lucas's idea of doing exactly that. He chose a time period that was just far enough to where he can create this whole new world that really it had nothing to do with the future, but at the same time, it had so much to do with it, Like, it was literally, there are two different worlds when you compare them, the Phantom Menace and Revenge of the Sith, starting with Star Wars and ending with A New Hope. Or, Return with the Jedi.
Yeah, what he did was say, like, let's expand this. And that kind of cut the ribbon on everything. Because maybe hadn't it happened, because like I say, looking back and even looking forward, maybe 20 years from now, people aren't going to, we're going to have a whole different view of this new trilogy. And I don't say I hate it. Because I've had a show, be honest, I've had a show where I pointed out the great things about it, and I loved it coming out. And then once in a while, I get on a thing where I say the things that are wrong with it. It's the nature of this podcast. But really, time will tell its impact. I can't even, you and me can't say now what will impact. It's going to be up to the next generation to tell us what these movies are going to mean.
But I think one advantage of this this trilogy series is that, well, maybe not for my age, because my age coming up through it, I did not know. But watching it now as an adult, and you probably watching it, being older, you kind of knew what you were getting through this. You knew that they were telling the story of Darth Vader.
Yes.
So in that sense, I kind of feel like it gave the audience a safety net of knowing what they were getting. So it was something that they can just dive right into and enjoy. This new trilogy, like we said before, you and I, we don't know where it's heading. We're kind of just waiting, like, okay, what's going on with Rey? What's going on with Kylo Ren? What's going on with Luke? Like, we're kind of just waiting. And the third installment is coming up, and that's supposed to be finalizing the trilogy, and we're still lost.
So, and that's something I wanted to ask you, too, was this, and I will touch upon this more later, but here's my real curiosity. So, I went in there knowing Anakin Skywalker was Darth Vader. Now, you go in watching Anakin Skywalker become Darth Vader. Knowing that, like, did you watch them in order?
Yes, I watched them in order.
So, I'm curious what your perception of... Okay, so, from my generation standpoint, finding out Darth Vader was Luke's father was like, whoa! The biggest, craziest thing. It was so crazy, I think Lucas didn't even let anybody know, and maybe slipped Mark Hamill the information at the last minute before the scene was shot, just so he could react more naturally. So that's what I'm saying. It was the big big, big shocker. So from your standpoint, like, because you're going in, you're hearing Luke Skywalker, what did all that mean to you? I'm curious, like the reveal and things like that. Did that have any impact? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for me, the reveal, like, I know Hayden Christensen gets a lot of heat for his portrayal of Anakin leading up to becoming Darth Vader.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, the reveal over time, it was convincing. It really was, you know? Like, going from, and like I said, it was perfect because Anakin was my age when I was introduced to him. And then by the time Hayden Christensen came out, I was a little bit older and I was closer to that age. So, you know, I could relate as this character grew and I could just understand, you know, it made sense. Like, I think a lot of times people forget that at that time, George Lucas wasn't trying to take Star Wars too serious.
Yeah.
You know, he was expanding something. And I think nowadays, there are different standards to actors and what we expect. We expect everything to be, you know, so serious. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the times, that's not what you need to tell a great story. You know, he might have not been the most in-depth character, but his growth from a little boy to Darth Vader, it sold me completely.
What I'm saying, when it got to that point where Vader's talking to Luke, because I'm curious if maybe your reaction was like, oh, man, he's about to tell him. Did you kind of get that when he goes, you don't know the truth about your father? Was that the turning? Because that was what they said was, you know what? To the next generation, it's going to mean, like to my generation, it's like, so, holy crap, it's his father. And to your generation, I would think it meant like, holy crap, he's telling him. Like I don't know if that moment had an impact. You know what I'm saying? Like, I am your father. Did it?
It kind of didn't because, unfortunately, growing up, that was it was just a trope that I always heard growing up. You know?
Like a Rocky line or something.
So a part of pop culture.
Yeah.
That just growing up as a child, I heard everyone saying that. So by the time I did actually see that trilogy, I already knew it was coming. I knew Darth Vader was going to say, "I am your father." You know.
Gotcha. I was just curious, but it's so common knowledge, and it is such a large part of pop culture. But I'm just curious.
I kind of want to touch more on Qui-Gon. Knowing what I know now, that it's canon that he was more aligned with the gray side of the Force versus being light or dark. They definitely, you know, if you're looking for that, watching this movie, knowing that knowledge, they definitely show that, you know. He's initially telling them that he can see that Anakin is the one. And I feel like that was because he was more in tune with both light and dark. Because when he said that, the rest of the council, their response was, his future is clouded. They couldn't see it. Yeah. And I feel like that was maybe because they were too polarized on one side, being the light side, you know? And I just picked up a lot of his fighting tactics kind of tended towards the dark side. You know, a lot of his tactics to get over on people was manipulation. He was always willing so easily to manipulate somebody and wave his fingers to change their mind, you know, and that's a more dark side type ability. So, like, it definitely does reflect that he's a great Jedi. They mentioned that he has a lot of, what's the word? He's more rebellious towards the Senate. You know, Obi-Wan kind of, or Yoda kind of talks to him, and he's like, you know, you're being a little bit rebellious like Qui-Gon after Qui-Gon had died, you know. Yeah,
he's kind of got his own vision of things and his own thoughts on things. Yeah, I can see where you're going with that.
Yeah, he's with the council, but he's kind of outside by himself, you know. He's there to help them, but he doesn't always obey to exactly what they say, you know, and that's why I honestly kind of feel with that final fight with him, Darth Maul, and Obi-Wan, I kind of feel that, honestly, Qui-Gon died on purpose. You know, they have that scene where those laser walls come up and he kneels down. I honestly feel he was tuning into the Force. And he, you know, it's kind of relevant throughout the movie that he is in tune with visions. You know, he's good at seeing the future. I believe in that scene, he was kneeling down and he knew the only way because he himself could see that Anakin was the chosen one, while the rest of the council couldn't. I feel he felt the only way he could get them to accept Anakin into and start training him was for him to die and Obi-Wan to become master over Anakin.
Yeah.
know?
Like
and I feel like that's why he died, and he made that only promise. He said, "Promise me that you'll train Anakin no matter what." You know, I feel like that was something that he did intentionally. He knew he had to set forth a chain of events initially.
Yeah. A lot of the Qui-Gon stuff, and it's and it's been brought up before too. People have said it, but it's like, and I've thought it. It's like, I am all on board if they do an Obi-Wan movie to see a Qui-Gon ghost, because I think that character, and whether a lot of it comes to Liam Neeson or George Lucas's writing, and like I said, if you look back at this, and like I said, people like to hate on everything, but really, this was for George Lucas coming out of the box 16 years later. When you really look at this movie and not look at things to complain about, like, there's some deep stuff going on.
There really is. Like, when you just look at this movie for what it is and understand what the overall story of the Star Wars universe is, these three movies, they played a large part in what we got and we are enjoying of the Star Wars universe. Like, without them, there would be a huge hole, And
when even like, Dave Filoni, he does these, he'll take some deep stories sometimes in the Clone Wars. It was the Ghost of Mortis. Are you familiar with that storyline?
Refresh me.
It's like they go to a planet, and it's like the light side ghost, the dark side ghost, and like the daughter. It's like the father, son, and the daughter. Yeah,
the father, son, and the daughter. Yes, I remember that one.
And they brought in Liam Neeson as the ghost of Qui-Gon, and it was straight up Liam Neeson voiced it. And when you see things like that, it's like Liam Neeson appreciates the character and what it meant, and the fans were all about it. It's like, wow, Qui-Gon. So, like I said, after the fact, because now since it's cooler to kind of pick apart the new movies, the prequels are just like no, there's some great stuff happening here, and eventually I believe we're going to see that about the new trilogy.
It may be a kind of a diamond in the rough kind of effect,
yeah,
or something. It takes time for it to form, and then we finally see like, wow, this was something amazing.
Yeah, and even like Anakin saying like I dreamt I came back and freed all the slaves. It's a foreshadowing him of overthrowing the Emperor. And I believed like the Chosen One prophecy was, who's going to get closer to the Emperor than another Sith? Who else is going to get the jump on him? Which is basically, I think that's the achievement, because it wasn't a feat of power. It was almost just like maybe his mastery of the Force and being Chosen One was like, okay, I'll bring it. Here's the riddle. Here's the riddle that I've kind of pondered with. There's a part in Return of the Jedi where Darth Vader says to the Emperor, "My son is on that ship." And the Emperor goes, "Strange, I have not sensed him. I wonder if your feelings on this are clear, Lord Vader." Okay? So you can take that two ways. Did Vader block the Emperor from seeing Luke, and that's what he's alluding to? Or is Vader just so focused on Luke that he's more powerful than the Emperor, and he sensed him even though the Emperor didn't? But the whole point being was, whatever it is, Vader could hide his feelings from the Emperor. And maybe that is the Chosen One thing. And I don't know. I mean, you really got to pick it apart and find out exactly what the thing was. Maybe because he walked both sides of the fence, he was the only one that actually got the jump on the Emperor. Not that he planned on it, but it was like the will of the Force, and that's what happened. It wasn't. That's what it was. It was he's the Chosen One because through the Force is using him as a vessel to bring the balance back.
And you want to know something? I completely agree with that, because by the end of the movie, the last note that I took was the fact that Palpatine is the unbalancing of the Force. Throughout the whole series, when they're talking about the Force being unbalanced, it is Palpatine himself who is the unbalanced.
Oh yeah,
you literally see it start with the Federation, it turns into the separation or the Separatists, and then it becomes the Empire. And the whole time, it is Palpatine who's leading it. So, like you said, what is the better way to get next to your enemy than become your enemy itself?
Yeah.
So I agree with that.
Like I said, it's funny because we both look at this with like fresh eyes and looking through the whole series, and that's what these shows are about. Is you see now and what it means today, and you look back and things have a deeper meaning, and that's why these shows are fun. But Khiim, it's always a pleasure doing these with you, And, we're planning on taking apart the hitting the other two, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith. I definitely want to continue this story, Khiim, and continue this conversation. But thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it as well.